Good evening and welcome to Bible study for the 3rd of November 2021. The Reverend James Merriam. This is our opportunity to dive a little bit into a piece of scripture that we might otherwise not get the chance to read. Of course, this Bible study will be followed here on NEK TV by the broadcast of last Sunday's worship, which unfortunately had to be recorded behind closed doors. We had some concerns about a couple of different COVID incidences, one at the church, one in church worship, one at the church. It appears there is nothing to be concerned about. All tests have come back negative as of yet, and we hope to return to worship in person very soon. But for the time being, we get this chance to be together in this way, and shortly afterwards, you get the telling of a wonderful dialogue sermon written by Martha Peck and presented by Martha Peck and Kaki Stenger, with some music from David and just wonderful worship that they recorded and put together for all of you and for all the world to enjoy. In our Bible study, we're going to be continuing on the reading from last week. We will still be in Mark chapter 12, Jesus teaching in the temple. This coming Sunday will be a remote virtual communion along with celebration of Veterans Sunday as Veterans Day, or Remembrance Day, or Armistice Day is coming up next week on the 11th. And it will also be our All Saints celebration. All Saints Day was Monday, the 1st of November, and so this is our annual tradition of celebrating and remembering the lives of those we've lost in the last year, and the more extended, just the great cloud of witness, all those who have been a part of our community and who have gone on before us to that heavenly home. So that's all coming up this coming Sunday. That will be on NEK TV, 9 o'clock Sunday morning, and available on YouTube, just like this. So, dear friends, we are here to worship God. We are here to come together and reflect on Scripture, to dive into Scripture, to take a deep analysis of Scripture. We follow up almost right after where we were last week, which was, of course, Jesus teaching with, discussing with first a Pharisee and then a Sadducee and then a scribe in the temple. And the scribe, to sort of everyone's surprise, and seemingly especially Jesus's, had the sort of greatest understanding and greatest receptiveness to Jesus's own teaching. This is the story of the greatest commandment. It's one of the central pieces in Jesus's teaching. It's a very important piece of scripture, and it was great to be able to look in the context a little bit more last week. Our scripture reading today follows almost right after that, and really is almost contiguous to it, though in between there's a brief kind of dumb passage. Excuse me, I don't mean to say it like that. It's very dated. It's very important about like minutia of interpretation, and Jesus facing somebody else's minutia with his own minutia, and about basically around the point of whether or not King David was himself divine, and thus David's lineage was itself divine, or if they were just the most beloved and blessed of servants. So this is, again, Jesus being critical of the scribes as a whole, of these sort of temple lawyers, record keepers, civil servants, those who are always present in the temple, those who are very much at the center of temple life, and ever involved in everything at the temple. They come and have challenged Jesus. The question of what the greatest commandment was an explicit challenge, trying to get him to slip up and step into some sort of heresy. But the response was so surprising that this particular scribe was so impressed that we speculated last week, and we can speculate to no end, whether this was a moment of inspiration and sort of not conversion, but this was a moment at which this particular scribe, who had dedicated himself and his life to this particular lifestyle, had a great change of heart and perhaps would mark a turning point in his life. And whether perhaps he went and was among the followers of Jesus in the times that came, though perhaps many who had been swayed by Jesus's teaching in the temple were not so enthusiastic to support him once he was condemned and executed. There is no question that, especially in the 40 days, or in the 50 days between Easter and Pentecost, in the days when Jesus was appearing really kind of only to his disciples, and rumors ran rampant about both Jesus being alive or this whole Jesus being alive thing being fake, which goes back to the very beginning, and even some of the stories are recounted in Scripture. Just to try to answer clearly stories that were going around and have really gone around the whole length of the time that the church has existed, the whole length of the time that people have been following Jesus, that there are great lies at the center of it. We'll still see these to the present day. Whether Jesus was a historical figure or not is often debated. Particular details that have become important, like Jesus' parentage, Jesus' ethnicity, have all become the sources of great conflict, and for many, have been enough to completely discount the story and the message, or at least the story, if not the message. It is one is reminded again of the famous comment by Mahatma Gandhi of, I very much like your Christ, but I really do not like your Christians, and they do not seem very similar. So this is, again, to the present day and all the way through, a criticism of all of us, of striving to be more like Christians rather than more like Christ. But that's not what we're here to talk about today, though it is certainly related. This is reading from the 12th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Mark, beginning with verse 38 and following through to the end at verse 44. And in his teachings he said, "Beware of the scribes, who like to go about in long robes and have salutations in the marketplaces and the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at feasts, who devour widows' houses and for pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greatest condemnation." And he sat down opposite the treasury. Hello, Adelaide is under the table and climbing up. You okay? You okay? I think you are just fine. You are just fine. There we are. Yeah, that's much better. But we're going to make sure she doesn't grab the camera. All right. Beware the greatest condemnation, speaking of the scribes. And he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the multitude putting money into the treasury. And rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put 2 copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she has, her whole living." We got a little bit of a chew mark on the Bible as I was going along. A well-worn Bible is a sign of an active spiritual life. Oh, hello. Hello. This is, as some of last week's scripture said, teach your children well. The scripture of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, of course, also speaks of teaching your children well. Teach your children, may they learn at their parents' knees. Oh, hi. And may they always have a faith that they can come home to. All right, we're going to go back down here. All right. So you have in that really kind of 2 little stories. First off, a general sort of condemnation by Jesus, specifically that the greatest condemnation in sort of the end, the last judgment sort of periods, will be against the scribes who were so hypocritical, who were the most high and mighty in their words and most despicable in their actions. There is a symmetry, of course, to that. Specifically, the scribes are called out for breaking out widows' houses, which seems to be something like, as in the present day, there's a lot of criticism for hoarding for over investment in property for profit, and which apparently then as now had driven up rental prices. So eviction of someone who's in a bad situation through no fault of their own is sort of embodied in throwing a widow out of her home. This is recognizable then and now as just being the kind of a just an unfeeling act, not an illegal act, not necessarily even a wrong act, because those who can't, if something is a business transaction and those who can't pay, they can't engage in the business transaction. But a despicable act, and one that everyone knows, and everyone knows he's not making this up. He's not exaggerating. He knows that these things absolutely happen. The other things that are called out about are a little harder to understand, which is first wearing long robes, which we are really out of context to really understand what's talking there. It's not really anything in like the scriptural laws either encouraging or discouraging people from wearing long robes, but it is literally in the time showing off wealth through having a lot of valuable fabric in your garments all the time. So it's being ostentatious. It's really showing off those who are supposed to be servants in the temple and the holy place. Not necessarily that they're supposed to be simple in their dress or their garb, but it's going beyond what is perhaps called for into what is really showing off and a excessive display of wealth. The third thing is maybe what's perhaps I think is meant to be most shocking, and that's why it's put first in the list here, and that is perhaps a betrayal of culture in the accolades in the marketplace is what's listed. And this is hard for us to recognize in the present day, because a couple hundred years ago there was a major change in sort of how economics work, and we stopped living so much in the similar situation to Jesus in a patronage system of community and of economics. And that is that really it's not what you know, it's who you know. It's you would have a patron, you would have somebody who sort of speaks for you and who you serve, and their opinion of you and their trusting of you, because they had access to resources, they had access to tools, they had access to land, they had access to means of production in economic terms, was the entire way that all of you made a living. And their good opinion of you was the only thing that mattered for your economic success, and your financial stability. So these patrons, people end up with people one-upping one another to try to get in the good graces, in the greater respect, in the greater higher opinion, and to get more of the stuff and more of the opportunity from these patrons. One of the ways that you would do this is just literally being hugely complimentary towards those people in public places, so that everyone could hear and see, and then basically that person could feel good about themselves. Singing someone's praises was a literal thing. It was to be woken up and to be followed around in all your public activity by a choir of people, a literal choir of people talking about how great you are. Not necessarily because you were particularly kind or even especially kind, but because there was perhaps an opportunity, or because they were trying to hold on to and further their own favor from this wealthy person or this important person for this patronage. So what we have here is presumably, and by implication, that these scribes who have temple connections are selling these temple connections, and so are corrupting the business of the temple. And that it's known that if you get in good with a temple scribe, you can advance. You can have some great economic opportunity, invitation to bribes, invitation to patronage in this kind of a way. That these people in this situation are trying to sell the patronage that they've earned. Not that that's unusual. That's how everything worked. But it's unbecoming of the temple, and it's very much in contrast to the mission and the idea that Jesus brings forward, which is allegiance and patronage, everyone to God and God to everyone. That, and especially and strikingly, that one of the ways that you show leadership is not by doling out these favors, it's by seeking favor and providing service to those who are beneath you. Servant leadership was incredible and revolutionary at the time. It's still striking and surprising, but it's really more that the rest of society has followed the church's example to a greater extent. Those, in some ways, are still very similar. The other story, that's the other part of the symmetry, is one of these widows, one of these those who have fallen into a place of despondent, of just economic despair through no fault of their own. Those who have no particular hope of ever finding patronage, have no particular hope of increasing their station in life, have perhaps some little bit of savings or some little bit of earnings through some little business that they do. And that this woman who comes into the temple to make an offering gives all that she has, gives out of her poverty rather than the great offerings made out of abundance. And now the disciples who are gathered with Jesus watching all of this happen are sort of are presented here as being yokels, being country just rubes who are just overawed by how much money is just being thrown around in these offerings by the rich and the powerful. But Jesus notices the really important things going on, which is that those who care, those who believe, those who are really truly invested are making great contributions out of what little they have, while others are making a big show of giving proportionally a lot less. This is one of the most noteworthy and most directly applicable stories in Scripture to the present day, though of course it too has been twisted so many ways into insisting that all should give until they do themselves harm. And our present movement to give a greater recognition to self-care, to really all people in all parts of society, and as the expression goes, to emulating flying on the safety briefing, flying on an airplane, put on your own mask before you help others. That you cannot help others out of an empty tank is a similar expression. Is to somewhat running contradictory to not this saying, but the manipulation of this saying, that all should give to the point that they do themselves harm. And that's certainly not what Jesus is talking about, but he is drawing a contrast, really admiring the widow, not because what she's doing is what all should do, but because it's so much a contrast and shows just the hypocrisy of making a big deal about giving a relatively little amount out of wealth versus giving a relatively enormous amount out of poverty. This continues to the present day to be a very challenging question, and gets the church in trouble all the time, trying to curry favor, the church at every level trying to curry favor with big donors, or big donors expecting that the church is going to do what they want because of the size of the donation, or threatening with donations. The church is built on small donations. The most stable and most hello, somebody wants some attention. The most stable and longest lasting churches are built on the gifts of many, given out of what is possible, rather than those of a few given to curry favor in the same way. So really, these two stories are well placed together. Perhaps they're together just because of chronology, but because they're together, they can be read together, and they both really enrich each other very significantly. Very important stories, really, really good stories, really quality and significant, and showing sort of the essence of Jesus now in this cosmopolitan, metropolitan, big world examples, and examples that are far, far closer to our present day to directly understand one-to-one. Really, it's a blessing to have these stories, and they cannot be read too infrequently. They're really, really important to be known, to be shared, to be taught to the next generation, and to be remembered. So wherever you are and whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, thank you for being with us. God bless you. Right up next should be the wonderful service from Martha Peck, Kathy Stenger, David Barlow, and Bill Peck. And thanks to all those who helped with that and will be joining us for that. So stay tuned, and God bless.